Thank you. Good eye. Thanks. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. I'll do my best to make this worth your while. For those of you who don't know me, my name is John Feeks. I'm the lead pastor here at New Life Sanctuary Church. And I was one of the scheduled combatants in what was to be an evening of rational interchange, of rational combat on the issue of whether or not abortion is indeed a woman's right. I want to apologize to all of you who have come and to all those who may be watching this DVD later, thinking that this exchange was going to take place at a different venue and you may have gone to the wrong venue. I want to catch you up on what's been going on in the last 7 months before we get into tonight's presentation. 7 months ago, we agreed that we would have an evening of debate on this important topic of whether or not abortion was indeed a woman's right. We had a venue, we had an opponent, we had a topic, and both of us set to work researching the topic as best we could, formulating arguments, getting prepared for tonight. In the 2 weeks prior to this day, social media lit up with a firestorm. The pro-choice side were so angry that two people wanted to talk about this, that they put sufficient pressure on our venue that they were afraid of violence, they were afraid of vandalism, they were afraid that the community would be harmed, and they canceled our contract. I went on social media. I went on the Life's Vision website. Big, long thread. Almost every post was a pro-choice person. You know what I didn't see there, dear friends? I didn't see anything that looked like an argument. I saw nothing but bitter hatred. And that's sad. 1 week before tonight, 1 week before the scheduled event, my opponent withdrew. He said he's been reading the social media. He's been consulting Facebook. He's out. His own side put sufficient pressure on that man that he withdrew. Now, I'm not going to go any further on this because I want to get to the lecture tonight. What you're going to hear tonight are my arguments for my position that women do not have a right to abort their unborn children. And if they're bad arguments, and you can show me they're bad arguments, I'll drop them. I won't use them anymore. But these are the arguments I would have used had we a debate tonight. I just thought it was not fair to people to cancel the whole event, so I figured I would at least give you some good arguments, what I think are good arguments. But friends, we have a problem here in Canada. We have a real threat to our free speech going on right now. And for your information, there are two agencies in Canada that you can turn to for some information, some guidance, and maybe some helpful information on how you can get involved in protecting our free speech. One agency is called the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms, and the other one is called the Canadian Civil Rights Association. I recommend you consult both those websites and get informed on what's going on here in our country. Freedom of speech is a charter right. Abortion is not. Okay? Now, take that for what it's worth. Two people have a right in Canada to sit down and have a conversation. And they have a right to invite others to that conversation if they want. That was totally taken away from us. And I am very, very disappointed in MBCI for refusing to take this opportunity to at least offer the venue for a rational interchange on this very, very important topic, this very important discussion. We are talking about whether or not innocent human lives are being destroyed to the tune of 100,000 every year in Canada. This is a very important topic. And I'm not going to go any further on this, but if you ask me during the question-answer period, and I hope somebody does, I will give you my educated opinion on what I think is happening there in the pro-choice community to cause this hostility and this infringement on our right to free speech. I won't go any further on that. So tonight, what I thought I would do for you all is to give you a lecture. 45 minutes or less, my arguments for my defense of the proposition that women do not have a right to destroy their unborn children. I'll let you know right now, dear friends, that we will be sharing a lot tonight, a lot of material. The topic is so important, I recommend you review this material again. Not because I'm just so thrilling to listen to or so delightful to look at. Okay, I'm not claiming any of that. But the topic is so vitally important, and the information I'm sharing with you is good, I think. And I would just invite you to review this and look at the bibliography. Look at the sources that I'm using, that I will be presenting tonight. Scholarly sources, trusted sources, look at them again. I'll be defending the proposition that women do not have a right to undergo an abortion. They do not have a right to destroy their unborn offspring. Right off the bat, friends, can we please agree, and I think we can agree, that it really doesn't matter how many signs a person carries. It doesn't really matter how many people you kick in the face. It really doesn't matter how many times you repeat yourself. It's my right, it's my right, it's my right, it's my right. It really doesn't matter how many times you say something like a mantra. Simple assertions really have no argumentative force, do they? Just saying something over and over again doesn't make it true. And we have to start there because I think our culture has become so dumbed down that we actually have to remind people that simply saying something a bunch of times doesn't make it true. How we feel about something doesn't make it true, dear friends. If I said to you, there's a red car in the parking lot, how you feel about that will not determine whether or not there's really a car sitting there in the parking lot. We're talking about a factual claim tonight. Do women have a right to destroy their unborn children? We know the government has given women this indulgence, but that does not bring down the conclusion that there's actually a human right here. We're going to talk about that tonight. Tonight we need to get down to the tough philosophical job of considering the preconditions of this debate philosophically. We need to think about the nature of human rights, the nature of the unborn. We need to look at the Canadian and U.S. charters, or UN charters rather, on human rights and freedoms, and the Criminal Code of Canada. You see, this is what I articulated to MBCI. I said, this is what our exchange is going to look like. It's academic in nature. I'll be showing no graphic images tonight. I'll not be drumming up emotion tonight. We're going to be talking about things that are rational, reasonable, things that we can think about, talk about. And it saddens me that the other side is shutting down the discussion. And that's very, very instructive, I think. Well, we do have some common ground, even with our pro-choice friends. We all agree, first of all, that there's no such thing as pure, unmitigated freedom. A woman says, I can do what I want with my body. Yes, you can. But you can't do literally anything you want to do with your body. You can't ball up your fist and punch your neighbor in the face. There's no such thing as pure, unmitigated freedom. We also agree that not all truth claims are equally true. Not all behavior is equally wholesome. We believe there are such things as objective standards, standards of right reason and right moral conduct. And we also believe there are such things as human rights. These things exist. We need to talk about the nature of human rights and how we might account for them. Well, let's begin tonight. We're going to explore the issue philosophically, and we'll come to my first argument for my proposition that women do not have a right to destroy their children, unborn children. I think we all can agree that there is an objectively correct way to connect and interpret our experiences. We are talking about the laws of rational inference. There's a right way to interpret the world. When we talk about the preconditions of intelligibility, or those things that must be in place for us to know something or to engage in rational inquiry, which is an attempt to discriminate between that which is to be accepted and to be rejected, minimally, we'd have to say there must exist some objective standards, a right way to think, to make moral judgments, and to discriminate between truth and error. And secondly, and this is very important, there must be some form of authoritative revelation. We must get the truth about these objective standards from a competent authority. Now, I'm going to telegraph my position here, but from a Christian perspective, God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of the Bible, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, He is that competent authority. He is the one who possesses the supreme right to be believed and obeyed, and He will set the standards of right reason and conduct. The Oxford Companion to Philosophy says this, quote, "Most deductive theorists agree that although inference is a psychological process, the principles which make it deductively correct and valid are independently of any psychological fact. This raises the question of what justifies the laws of logic. The laws of logic, dear friends, are universal, non-material, unchanging, and prescriptive. They prescribe to us how we ought to be thinking. Now, what is the source of the laws of logic, and how do we know anything about these abstract entities which are, in the nature of the case, causally effete? We don't stand in any causal connection to these things. Now, how are we aware of them? Where do they come from? Standards of right reason, and how do we know anything about them? Tonight, we'll be referring to classes of beings. Classes. You see on the screen depicted for you 2 classes of creatures. Class 1, cats. Class 2, dogs. And if you're on the ball and you haven't gone to sleep yet, you'll notice that in Class 2 we have some intruders in my diagram. Do you see them? By golly, there's a couple cats there in Class 2. Now, to the extent that you think I've made a mistake by posting a picture like that as a depiction of a class called dog, you're agreeing with me that the borders and contents of classes are established objectively. They are not subject to human opinion. They are objectively established. Tonight we'll be talking about humans, a class of beings called humans, and another class called non-humans. We will be discussing which class the unborn child belongs to, that unborn entity inside the womb of the expectant mother. Is it a human or not a human? Which class does it belong to? Now I'll ask a question. It doesn't really matter, really, what side you fall on. If you want to argue that the unborn are not human, or if you want to argue they are human, don't you see that the fact that we'll argue about this is just giving evidence to the fact that we all agree that the borders and contents of classes of things are not subject to human opinion. They are objectively established. Otherwise, we wouldn't argue, would we? We wouldn't try to correct each other, would we? But you see, this is a problem here. In philosophy, classes are used interchangeably with the word sets, classes and sets. Alexander D. Oliver of the University of Cambridge writes, abstract entities, like classes and sets, are conceived of as problematic for epistemological reasons. How can we refer to or know anything about entities with which we have no causal commerce? Classes and sets, like the laws of logic, are abstract in nature and therefore causally effete. Now, how are we aware of logic or classes? In fact, when we think about the preconditions of intelligibility or the preconditions of knowing anything, we have quite a few things that we have to try to account for, like identity over time. How is it that something can remain the same thing even though it experiences all kinds of physical change? How can it be the same object despite physical change over time? How about the laws of logic and their applicability to the changing physical world? What about the uniformity of nature that we observe and expect to continue observing, and the validity of inductive reasoning? What about our belief that we have generally reliable, rational, and cognitive faculties? What about the applicability of math and numbers, conceptual entities, to the changing physical world? Now, friends, I won't keep berating everybody with all this deep philosophy, but I'm telling you, there is something here that needs to be talked about. The preconditions of knowledge. How do we account for them? Well, the Christian has an answer. It's an answer that the non-Christian doesn't like, but it is an answer. The Christian answer is that God created an orderly, intelligible world, and he has enlightened the human mind to properly understand it. The Bible says in Christ are hid all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. Who hath put wisdom in the inward parts, and who hath given understanding to the heart? Well, God has done that. The laws of logic reflect the rational character of God. He made the world an orderly, intelligible place, and he made us, his image bearers, creatures capable of learning. We are talking about the preconditions of our debate tonight. And I say only the God of the Bible can account for these things. It's important. The Princeton philosopher Harry Gordon Frankfurt said this. He said, the claim that a basis for doubt is inconceivable is justified whenever a denial of the claim would violate the conditions or presuppositions of rational inquiry. I'm claiming tonight that you cannot doubt Christianity, because to doubt Christianity is just to doubt that very thing, namely the God of the Bible, who justifies all logic and reasoning and rational and moral evaluation. If you jettison Christianity, you've undercut the validity of all reasoning. And I'd like to hear something that looks like an argument against that one day. I've yet to hear it. I get all kinds of inane responses, but nothing that looks like an argument. Tonight, we're going to be talking about human rights. Human rights. Well, what are human rights, after all? I went to talk to my Liberal MP about human rights. I said, what are human rights? And he couldn't even begin to tell me. So I told him, rights are principles of freedom or entitlement. They are rules prescribing what is allowed of people or owed to them. Now, where do rights come from? Do you think the government creates rights for people? Do you think that? You can't possibly think that. Many in the pro-choice camp say, my right to abort my child, that's my right because the Canadian government said so. Well, you can't possibly think that way. If governments create human rights, and that's what you believe, you have just given up any principled moral complaint against governments who trample on the rights of people. It's much deeper than this. The famed British scholar, philosopher, Anthony Quinton, he said this concerning human rights. He said, human rights are rights that human beings possess simply in virtue of being human. Human rights are perhaps more satisfactorily defined as rights which humans possess independently of positive law. He gives some examples too. The point is, just because the government grants an indulgence doesn't mean that that's your right. That's sort of the point here. Michael Ignatieff, in his book, The Rights Revolution, says this: we already possess our rights in two senses, either because our ancestors secured them or because they are inherent in the very idea of being human. Such inherent rights would include the right not to be tortured, abused, beaten, or starved. These inherent rights we now call human rights, and they have force whether or not they are explicitly recognized in the laws of nation states. Thus, human rights may be violated even when no state law is being infringed. And I think we generally have a sense of this, don't we? Aren't there governments in the world right now that are trampling on the rights of their citizens? There are such things as human rights, and they transcend human opinion and human government. The United Nations document, the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. In its preamble, it states that they recognize the rights of all members of the human family. See, they didn't create rights, they're recognizing the rights of all members of the human family. But Lord Quinton has a problem. Quinton says that rights, like law, presuppose a sovereign legislator and organized sanctions to enforce them. Now, who might that be? If human rights sit above human opinion and above human government, who might the sovereign legislator be? Well, Marcello Pera, a philosopher and politician who served as president of the Italian Senate from 01 to 06, he wrote a book. As an atheist, he wrote a book, and shockingly, the title of the book is Why We Should Call Ourselves Christians. He said, Europe needs to adopt Christianity or we've had it. And this is what Pera said. He said, the rights of human beings are to liberals as the laws of nature are to the scientists. Once discovered, not invented by someone at a certain time and place, they are valid for all and forever. But just as the laws of nature refer to an order inscribed on the world, the rights of human beings refer to a God who has stamped his image upon man. And this is clearly the Christian vision of God, creator of the natural and moral world. Our own Charter of Rights and Freedoms here in Canada seems to recognize the very same thing that PIRA recognized. In the opening statement in our own charter, we are reminded that Canada is founded upon principles that recognize the supremacy of God and the rule of law. Sure. What else would count as a valid foundation for human rights? Our own charter, that is a document, I recommend you read it. That is a document we can get behind. It's a wonderful document. Let's protect it. Point 7 says in our charter, everyone has a right to life, liberty, and security of the person, and the right not to be deprived thereof, except in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice. We can get behind that. That sounds right. Look at here, when it comes to equality rights. Every individual is equal before and under the law and has the right to the equal protection and equal benefit of the law without discrimination, and in particular without discrimination based on race, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, sex, age, or mental or physical disability. That is, those last couple items there are precisely why most kids are being destroyed in the womb. Wrong sex. We think you might be disabled. You're not developed enough. You're not old enough. We have every right to destroy you. It says here, number 2, and I'm quoting from our charter, subsection 1 does not preclude any law, program, or activity that has as its object the amelioration of conditions of disadvantaged individuals or groups, including those that are disadvantaged because of race, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, sex, age, or mental or physical disability. I would think in a country that has a charter like that, our government would be applauding pro-life groups, it would be protecting their freedom, it would be encouraging and providing for them. We need to get back to our we need to get back to our charter. We need to remind people of what our charter says. The United Nations has a declaration on the rights of the child. And this, of course, is well beyond the borders of all countries. This is the United Nations official document. It says, bearing in mind that, as indicated in the Declaration of the Rights of the Child, now I'm quoting, the child, by reason of his physical and mental immaturity, needs special safeguards and care, including appropriate legal protection before as well as after birth. What do you think they meant when they wrote that? I think it means we should have some legislation in place to protect tiny unborn little humans. That's the United Nations. Well, now we have a little problem, don't we? Because women have some rights to do with their body what they want to do, and that apparently tiny unborn humans have a right to some things as well. Now, whose rights trump whose around here? Well, Lord Quinton has something that I think maps onto our intuitions on things, and I'd like you to hear what he says. He says, regarding the variety and continuing proliferation of the rights claimed, including rights to such things as employment, education, and an adequate standard of living, rights for all to be provided with something are less plausible than the rights to non-interference. So what he's saying is, we all know that we have human rights, but discovering what they are exactly can be tricky. And he says, as a basic methodological principle, he says it seems more plausible that a right to be left alone to live, that seems more plausible than a positive right to some good or service. Now, I think that would match our own intuitions on things. The problem is, if you apply this to the topic of abortion, then it's a problem. If you want to destroy that unborn entity, this is a problem. Because what Quinton is saying here, really, by extension, is that the unborn have a more plausible right to be left alone to live than the woman has a right to some service, and in this case, the service would be abortion. And I'll let that sit with you. How can we make sense of human experience? How can we make sense of the existence of human rights and our ability to discern them? I would say the God of Christian theism is the only appropriate foundation and explanation for these things. And that really is tonight my first argument. Since God alone can account for the intelligibility of this very debate, it is in the very nature of the case irrational and immoral to ignore or deny his word on the matter. And make no mistake, friends, God has spoken. He has spoken clearly in his word, the Bible. The unborn in his word are referred to as children. They're referred to as babies. Under the Mosaic Law Code, it was the death penalty for anybody who would strike a pregnant woman and kill the unborn. The Bible says in Psalm 127 in verse 3, children are an heritage of the Lord. The fruit of the womb is his reward. The psalmist himself, recording inspired text, says he sees a continuity of his person from the womb to the time he penned these words. On you I have rested from the womb. You are he who took me out of my mother's bowels. My praise always shall be of you. That's my first argument. My second argument is much shorter, and a great sigh of relief goes over the entire audience here tonight. My second argument refers us to the Criminal Code of Canada. I will state the argument syllogistically, clearly. 1, it is illegal for a parent to neglect to protect and preserve the life of their child. 2, abortion entails the withdrawal of protection and preservation of the child. 3, abortion is illegal or should be. Our own Criminal Code of Canada, 215, tells us that everyone is under a legal duty as a parent, foster parent, guardian, or head of a family to provide the necessities of life for a child under the age of 16 years. Duty, for the purposes of this section, means a duty imposed by law. We are also told in the Criminal Code of Canada, 218, you may not abandon or expose a child under the age of 10. So under the age of 16, you must provide, according to the Criminal Code, for the necessities of life for your child. Child, let's get that. Well, 223 of the Criminal Code says that a child becomes a human being within the meaning of this act when it is completely preceded in a living state from the body of its mother. So according to the Government of Canada, as expressed in the Criminal Code, the expectant mother has a non-human child in her womb. This makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, no scientific sense. However, according to the Criminal Code, 223, the unborn are children. We saw that very clearly. Did we not just see that? The Criminal Code says the expectant mother has a child in her womb. Child becomes human when it's born. Okay, but according to 215, it is illegal to withhold the necessities of life for a child under 16 years old, and it is illegal to abandon a child under the age of 10. Both offenses are punishable by imprisonment. That tells me, according to the Criminal Code, abortion is illegal. For my pro-choice friends who want to say abortion is not killing, it's simply withdrawing life support, first of all, you're wrong. Second of all, according to the Criminal Code of Canada, it's still a criminal act. You're obligated at law to provide for the necessities of life for your child. I talked to Stephen Barber on this. He has a master's in law. He says, I think you're onto something here. We should explore this. We have no real abortion laws in Canada, but I think I found something in the Criminal Code that at least prohibits partial birth abortion. 238, everyone who causes the death in the act of birth of any child that has not become a human being in such a manner that if the child were a human being, he would be guilty of murder, is guilty of an indictable offense and liable to imprisonment for life. How do you read that? Does that sound like you cannot kill a baby while it's being born? That's how it sounds to me. No abortion laws in Canada. There's enough in print in black and white right now. If we would start enforcing some of this, I think we should start writing some letters. I think we should draw some more attention to our Canadian Charter and to the Criminal Code of Canada, like now. My third and final argument tonight proceeds from a proximate starting point. I will be appealing tonight to common notions and to standard definitions. It won't be special pleading, and we're going to look at those who are experts in the things that we're talking about. This argument is also given to us tonight syllogistically, clearly. 1, women do not have a right to intentionally destroy innocent human life. 2, abortion is the direct and intentional destruction of innocent human life. 3, conclusion, women do not have a right to undergo an abortion. I think premise 1 maps onto our intuitions on things. I don't think there's any great need to defend that proposition. It's wrong to intentionally destroy an innocent human being. But that's what abortion is. I'll be appealing to standard definitions. Merriam-Webster's says that a human being is a person. The Cambridge Dictionary says a human is a man, a woman, or a child. The Canadian Dictionary says a human is one belonging to or characteristic of people or humankind, a human being, any man, woman, or child of the species Homo sapiens. Dictionary.com says a human being is a person. The Collins Dictionary says you can refer to people as humans. The Oxford Learner's Dictionary says a human being is a person. This online dictionary says a human is a person. The Toromont Webster's Illustrated Encyclopedic Dictionary says a human being is a member of the genus Homo, especially of the species Homo sapiens, a person. The Macmillan Dictionary says a human being is a person. Vocabulary.com says a human is a person. I've checked just about every source I could find. According to standard and widely accepted definitions, human beings are people, every last one of them, period. Thank you. So what do the experts say about the unborn? Well, friends, I think most of you have come here tonight not to hear philosophy, but maybe to hear some science. Let's proceed with a scientific investigation of the unborn so that we can better understand what we're talking about here, okay? This developmental biology textbook says fertilization marks the beginning of a new organism. This human biology textbook says we start with the remarkable process that marks the beginning of human life, fertilization. This human development textbook says at conception, egg and sperm unite to create a new organism. As we proceed here, I want you to remember the very, very popular pro-choice claim that the woman can do what she wants with her body. She says it's her body. We've looked at a couple textbooks that say, no, there's another body in there. This biology textbook says the human life cycle begins at fertilization. This Pregnancy Day by Day book came out just earlier this year, written by a virtual army of obstetricians and gynecologists and medical experts, and they say here on this page, this week a miracle takes place, your baby is conceived. Your baby is conceived. Not a zygote or a blastula or something, your baby is conceived. A.W. Lilly, research professor of prenatal physiology, wrote that the baby and the mother are separate individuals from conception. This Life magazine publication says the birth of a human really occurs at conception. Jerome Lejeune, professor of genetics in Paris, said after fertilization has taken place, a new human being has come into existence. Professor M. Matthews Roth of Harvard says it is scientifically correct to say that an individual human life begins at conception. This textbook says fertilization. He says, although life is a continuous process, fertilization is a critical landmark because under ordinary circumstances, a new genetically distinct human organism is thereby formed. This textbook says the time of fertilization represents the starting point in the life history or ontogeny of the individual. This textbook says the zygote represents the beginning of a human being, the beginning of a human being. This textbook says at the moment the sperm cell of the human male meets the ovum of the female and the union results in a fertilized ovum, zygote, a new life has begun. This book says from fertilization to the end of the 8th week of pregnancy, the embryo grows rapidly. An embryo. That early on, it's called an embryo. This is a very interesting publication here. It came out in 2012 by the Province of British Columbia Ministry of Health. A huge task force of medical experts got together to draft up this document published by the government, by the provincial government. They tell us here the first trimester or first 14 weeks is an important time in your baby's life. In your baby's life, the first 14 weeks after conception. The first trimester is a critical time in your baby's life, says the publication. The embryo is called the developing baby, and the fetus is called an unborn baby. Helpful glossary at the back of that publication. Even Peter Singer, who wrote Practical Ethics, he's an outspoken animal rights advocate, outspoken pro-choice advocate. Peter Singer himself said, there is no doubt that from the first moments of its existence, an embryo conceived from human sperm and egg is a human being. David Boonin, another pro-choice advocate, says a human fetus, after all, is simply a human being at a very early stage of his or her development. Well, of course, it's a separate individual from the mother. It produces an enzyme to suppress the mother's immune system so the mother doesn't kill it. That's a little human being in there protecting itself. For years, Manitoba Liquor and Lotteries has had a campaign targeting pregnant women. What's the campaign? Be with child without alcohol. Be with child, not a zygote or something. This lady here is holding on the poster an ultrasound of her unborn baby. This is the unmistakable profile of a tiny human child in her stomach. You can go to the Liquor Commission and take this little publication out for free. A message from Dr. Longstaff. Fetal alcohol spectrum disorder is a lifelong condition that results from a baby being exposed to alcohol before birth. A baby. By golly, there's a baby in there. The cigarette package, I pick up these things off the street, The cigarette package says, secondhand smoke contains many toxic chemicals that can harm an unborn baby. A few years ago, PBS had a documentary entitled Twice Born, a little army of doctors going into the wombs of pregnant women and performing life-saving surgery on the babies. He says, if you can get to the babies earlier while they're still inside their mothers, you can stop some of the damage of birth defects before it's too late. Discover magazine back in February 1991 did an article on this. The article was entitled, Surgery Before Birth, the Challenge of Medicine's Tiniest Patients. Similar news outlets have published stories like this. This is from Yale Medicine. Fetal surgery, huge strides in care for the tiniest patients, operating on babies still in the womb. Live Science did an article, The Tiniest Patients, Fetal Surgery Delivers Big Results. This is from theguardian.com. Surgery in the womb, miracle maker for NHS's tiniest patients. Do you notice that word keeps popping up? Patients, tiny little patients. According to the Webster's Collegiate Dictionary, a patient is a person receiving care or treatment, especially from a doctor. These doctors know that they're working on little patients in their mother's wombs. This is a picture of a baby that was stillborn, only 12 weeks developed. You can see that very clearly. That's a tiny little human being. This is baby Noah, another child who miscarried at 12 weeks. If you can't see a tiny little person there, only 12 weeks along, if you can't see that, maybe there's help for you. New Scientist magazine had an article a few years ago, and they asked the question in the article, could a fetus lying in the womb be planning its future? The question comes from the discovery that brain areas thought to be involved in introspection and other aspects of consciousness are fully formed in newborn babies. This Science Daily article covers the same story. Functional MRI scanning done on newborn babies showing that areas thought to be associated with introspection and planning are already fully developed. And this is what the article says. Our study shows that babies' brains are more fully formed than we thought. More generally, we expect to be able to explain the activity we can see on the brain scans in terms of thinking or doing some task. Brain waves revealing electrical activity have been detected from 6 weeks. And by 26 weeks, rapid eye movement sleep occurs, usually associated with dreaming. This publication says your baby can grasp her feet at will. At will? Volition in the womb. Yes. Scientific American had an article a while ago. The title of the article was Social Before Birth. Twins first interact with each other as fetuses. Look at the article, friends. The results suggest that twin fetuses are aware of their counterparts. Awareness. Really? Contact between them appeared to be planned. Planning. Fetuses displayed skilled movements by the 5th month of gestation. This special Newsweek edition was all about the baby's brain. It tells us that while they're still in the womb, they listen to their mother's voice. They're listening while inside their mother's womb. This publication came out earlier this year. It says, now that he can hear, your amazing baby is starting to develop the ability to remember things too. They'll make a sound and they'll startle the unborn baby. They'll make that sound again later on and the baby's not startled anymore. That baby's developing the ability to remember in the womb. The article from Newsweek continues. It tells us that the flavors from what the mother eats and drinks transfer to the fetus through the surrounding amniotic fluids, and the baby is getting information about what food the mother likes to eat. It tells us here, now listen to this, please. Like the rest of us, the fetus finds some of these smells more pleasant than others. An opinion. There have been some studies where researchers were looking at a fetus on an ultrasound, and someone walked by with a cigarette. Says Green, the unborn baby actually made a grimace. There's a little person in there that's thinking, interacting, it's got an opinion. A few years ago, CBC, I'm not going to go any further, CBC had a documentary called The Passionate Eye, and they covered all kinds of neat topics on The Passionate Eye. One was called The Secret Life of Babies. That program tells us, and I'm quoting from the program, babies begin learning language in the womb. They begin learning in the womb. This AOL article shows a video of an ultrasound of an unborn baby clapping along with its mother's song. These are not globs of insensate tissue. This is Dr. Bernard Nathanson. He co-founded NARWAL, National Association for the Repeal of Abortion Laws, in 1969. He himself performed thousands of abortions. He supervised many more. His clinic performed something to the tune of 75,000 abortions. I doubt anybody here in this room or anybody watching this video is as close to the topic as Nathanson was. He became head of obstetrical services at St. Luke's in New York, and there he looked at the unborn in greater detail. He says, as a result of all this technology, looking at this baby, unborn, examining it, investigating it, watching its metabolic functions, watching it urinate, swallow, move, and sleep, watching it dream, which you could see by its rapid eye movements via ultrasound, treating it, operating on it, I finally came to the conviction that this was my patient, this was a person. That's Bernard Nathanson. And he spent the rest of his life trying to undo the damage he did. We have a real problem in our country, friends. It's called dehumanization. When you dehumanize somebody, you deprive them of human qualities, personality, or spirit. According to philosopher Michael Mazzei from the University of Colorado, dehumanization is the psychological process of dehumanizing the enemy, making them seem less than human and hence not worthy of humane treatment. This can lead to increased violence, human rights violations, war crimes, and genocide. Jews in the eyes of the Nazis and Tutsis in the eyes of the Hutus in the Rwandan genocide are but two examples. Psychologically, she says, it is necessary to categorize one's enemy as subhuman in order to legitimize increased violence or justify violation of basic human rights. In severe cases, dehumanization makes the violation generally accepted norms of behavior regarding one's fellow man seem reasonable or even necessary. I think that's what we're seeing in Canada right now. We're dehumanizing the unborn and calling it a right to be defended. Nelson Mandela said, to deny people their human rights is to challenge their very humanity. We agree with Mandela, but friends, in Canada, it's much, much worse than that. Ethicists, writers, defenders of the pro-choice position, like Singer, Boonin, and Paglia, they're willing to admit that we are dealing with human beings and they are people. In fact, Camille Paglia said this. She said, the pro-life position, whether or not it's based on religious orthodoxy, is more ethically highly involved than my own tenet of unrestrained access to abortion on demand. Hence, I've always frankly admitted that abortion is murder, the extermination of the powerless by the powerful. She says, liberals for the most part have shrunk from facing the ethical consequences of their embrace of abortion, which results in the annihilation, she says, of concrete individuals and not just clumps of insensate tissue. Camille Paglia says abortion is murder. We're killing people. She says, let's just be honest about it. She's a pro-choice advocate. She says it's okay because she's Darwinian in her ethics. She's an atheist. She's Darwinian. She says survival of the fittest. This is how nature operates. Let's not be ashamed of what we're doing. Well, I'll tell you who else was Darwinian. That was Adolf Hitler. You can go to the Human Rights Museum. You'll see this Nazi propaganda material there posted. I took this picture in 2016. You see there on the left, there's a poor disabled man, and on the right, there's a whole family. And in German, it's telling the citizens of Germany, why waste money on this disabled person? Why not just kill them? And that money can go to help a healthy family. Richard Dawkins, who is the famous atheist, the closest thing to a professional atheist I think there is now, the famous Oxford biologist, he said it would be immoral not to destroy a person with Down syndrome in the womb. He said that would be immoral to do that. Well, people are listening. In Denmark, Down syndrome is headed for extinction. Last year, 98% of pregnant women who were revealed to be carrying an unborn child with Down syndrome chose to have an abortion. Well, friends, this is brilliant. You want to cure Down syndrome, just kill everybody who has it. There, you've solved the problem, right? How'd you like to solve cancer like that? Go online sometime and look up people with Down syndrome. Look up celebrities with Down syndrome. We have athletes with Down syndrome, actors, public speakers, models. They are happy, healthy, functioning members of our society. And as a culture, we will applaud their inclusion into schools and places of employment. We will do that. And yet, as a culture, we recommend their exclusion from the world of the living. And these people are smart enough to know that there are people out there who think the world would just be a better place without them. How do you think they feel? Well, I can tell you, dear friends, for me, this is not just an academic exercise. My firstborn son had Down syndrome. The world is not a better place without him. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, human rights are based on things we all share equally, i.e., our human nature, or they are based on accidental physical characteristics, traits, abilities, capacities that we don't share equally. If you're a pro-choice person, that's what you believe. Human rights are only given to those who qualify physically, mentally. You're developed enough. If you believe that, I'm telling you, you're in danger. We all are. Anyone becomes a potential target when we live under a regime like that. It happens every day. It's been happening since the dawn of humanity. Ladies and gentlemen, human rights exist, and they are anchored in our human nature given to us by the God whose image we bear. And I'll leave the last quote tonight to Michael Ignatieff in his book, The Human Rights Revolution. He says this, and please let this sink down into your ears. He says, we all know people who combine high-flown commitment to human rights with low-down disregard for all actual human beings who stand in their way. It seems obvious that charity, not to mention decency, begins at home, and that we have a good reason to put our primary moral emphasis on particular duties to those nearest us. I want to say that I can't imagine a closer bond than the bond that exists between a mother and her unborn child. And Ignatieff wants to say that decency, charity, goodness, it starts with the recognized duty to those closest to you. I want to end my lecture here speaking as a pastor, if I can do that. There may be people here today that have had an abortion. There may be people here who have participated in abortion or have applauded it in somehow or encouraged it somehow. And maybe you're sitting here and you don't feel so good about yourself right now. I want you to know two things. And I can say this on the authority of the Word of God. Number one, abortion is wrong, and you're guilty for having any part in it. Number two, the God of heaven loves you very, very much. And He has provided a way for you to be forgiven, cleansed, reborn. Jesus Christ hung on a cross for 6 hours, and as he died, he paid the world's sin debt in full. If you'll trust him as the one who paid for your sins, you'll receive him as your Savior, he will save you. He will wash you clean, forgive you. He'll secure a home in heaven for you that no one can ever take away. And he'll walk with you step by step every day of your life on this earth. I promise you that. He did it for me. He'll do it for you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your attention, for your respect. And I think what we'll do now is we'll take a 5-minute break, and then we'll invite you to come. You can line up at the mic if you have any questions, and I'll do my very best to answer your questions. And if I can't, I promise I won't make things up, okay? Okay, well, God bless you. Take a little break and come on back in 5 minutes. Thank you so much.